Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Briar Harvey. This is the Neurodiversity Media Network. We are here, I just want to be very clear, in real life with real children running amok today. So,
Running amok.
we are going to be as long as we need to be. And truly, it's a bait and switch anyway. So, I've been telling people that today I've been telling people that we're going to talk about how to create community in large organizations. And I do believe that Faith has a few things in that regard. But mostly what she has is a very long statement about how that's not your fucking responsibility. And it's not anyone's job to make things easier for the systems of power in the workplace. So, on that note, listen, it's not our jobs. It's not our jobs to make workplace culture better. It's just not.
The thing is that it's like I don't, I hate to be reductive, right? So when I think it's not our jobs, I'm like, being alive and being good humans is everybody's job. What what we don't want to do is to stack the game, rig the game. This is what we do. Rig the game so it works a particular way and then make it somebody else's responsibility to change the rigged game. And I think part of this has to be the collective understanding that the game is rigged and the collective ownership of the shift, knowing fully well that some people are on the other side of the riggings. That there are some people who don't experience the game as rigged because it works in their favor. If you're gambling and the house wins, if you're in in a casino. So if the house wins, the house isn't like they aren't strategizing how to not win.
Right.
So
It
it,
works
it,
great for the house.
it's fine. So I think a lot of this has to be there are absolutely ways that when everybody's in agreement that we want to do something different, then there are some practical things that everybody and anybody can do. But we have to own that it's an act of revolution, right? And that means that it's risky for the people for whom the game is rigged against. It is going to cost them more to advocate for something that isn't going to happen naturally. That you have to break the system to make happen. So that's the trade-off here. And so I think when we are in workspaces where we know this is the thing that needs to happen, and the powers that be say we agree this is what happens, and you have some reasonable sense of they really want to make this happen, it still is risky to stick your neck out and try to make it happen, because this is like, was it the pig and the chicken? Somebody's laying eggs, somebody's giving their life. So this is your bread and butter, this is your rent and mortgage, this is your children's food, and it would be foolish to not just own that you could be out there revolutionarying and lose fundamental things for yourself and your family. Yeah.
And we are not advocating for that. We
No.
are not advocating that the revolution has to be led by the people who are most likely to suffer the consequences for it. That's just the way that happens, not the way that
Right.
that should happen.
And I think that there, for everything, there's a tipping point, and the tipping point when the number of people advocating for it gets more than halfway. Let's see what's happening downstairs. Okay, gets to more than halfway, and that means that the minority that's advocating kind of that group grows and grows and grows. So it means that there are people in privilege and power who need to come alongside whatever this point of view is, who have to say no to the rigging and acknowledge that they're going to lose something to gain something else. And that's the only way it really happens. That more people kind of join the mass, and that quorum becomes bigger and stronger. But yeah, but yes, no giving up. Like, children must eat food and go to school and do other things. I've told people that I'll help the educational system after. Let me solve my kids, and that's what I did.
Right. And I think that when this is really easy in the abstract, when we are talking to small business owners who aren't building anything more than what it is they need to fulfill their own livelihoods. This is a much different game when we're talking to people who are employed for someone else and whose entire world rests on meeting those obligations.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for those people, it's important to just acknowledge and maybe assess where there's space in the organization for change. And when I say space, I mean, who's the person, the potential, I hate the word ally, not hate, but we all think different things, but like, where is the little bit of room that can, without harm to you, you can like influence? Is it that there already exists an affinity group? Is it that HR has been trying bunches of things over and over again? You keep seeing the same trainings come through. Is it that, like, where's the little wormhole that we can step into and say, okay, can we spread this out a little bit more? And I think that if we can't find that, and when you think about building community, building healthy community at work, it feels all kinds of burdensome, all kinds of stressful, and you feel fear, it probably is a good indication that this is not, don't do this then. But if you feel like there's space to do something, I think that there's a couple of things to consider. And the first thing is just why would you do anything? And I think even the most introverted of us, even the most um lone ranger of us, acknowledge that we need our community. Like, even if it's community to be silent with us, we need our community. And I can't forget the whichever story it was. I don't even, like, I'm probably quoting the research completely wrong, where they tortured the monkey in the cage. Not tortured, but like stressed them out, loud sounds and all kinds of things, and then a blood drawn, took the cortisol level, and the cortisol was like high, and then they brought in a second monkey, and then they stressed them out, and they did the blood draw, and the cortisol level was half. There's something about
Mm.
environmental stressors, that the environmental stressors don't have to change. They should change. They should stop it with these environmental stressors. But in terms of us and our own well-being, environmental stressors don't have to change if we have community, if we have the right kind of people around us. Like, even Bruce Perry's research on trauma said that the one thing that mitigated the effect of trauma over the lifespan is quality relationships. So, and I'm a big fan of, can we get these relationships at work? I mean, we're spending, the large chunk of the day there anyway. So let's how do we build something like that at work? Drop our blood pressure, drop the cortisol, get the kidneys not being overworked while we're sitting down every single day.
But that does require some vulnerability, if on my part, if that's not the corporate culture.
Yeah.
And in many cases, especially when we are talking about our people here, if I am autistic and reaching out to somebody at work, I may misinterpret signs.
Yeah.
And then what?
I mean, you may misinterpret signs, they may misinterpret signs. The whole thing about culture is a it's a mechanism of meaning making. It's a way that we figure out what we each mean. And if we haven't done any work to kind of redefine those mechanisms, then of course we're going to get misinterpreted. We're going to be like, all of those old things are going to be showing up in the system. Yeah. And that's going to hurt. That's definitely going to be a big risk. And so I think that if we want to practice any of these kinds of community things, that's why I say show up where there is space. If there exists a space where you're not as likely to be misunderstood, that's the space to play. If there exists a space where, if we already have lunch and learns, then is there a way to have a lunch and learn specific to either a topic or process, or even like activity that you want to do with people that you enjoy. Because more than likely, if you say we're going to have a lunch and learn on um, handling sensory overwhelm, then the people who show up in the room are likely to be people who are like, these are my people. they,
Right.
right? And so for me, I'm always looking at the system. Where are the kind of existing system spaces where we can be like, where are my people that I actually feel some amount of safety with already? And then how do we practice some bravery in those spaces? How do we push the boundaries out a little bit more? Some educators and who are they? Other people have defined this idea of a brave space, and I like it as a way of defining being willing to be in a space with people, not
Right.
prioritizing comfort, but prioritizing instead listening really well, prioritizing mindfulness, prioritizing honesty and reflecting each other, like reflecting to each other. And if we can have already a little cluster of people that we want to practice that with, then we can say, hey, once a month, why don't we get together? These are our agreements with each other. This is Vegas. What happens here stays here. And you can have it closed or open. You can say every week we're having this thing. If you want to come, just know you're abiding by these rules. Or you can say, nope, you have to apply. We have to vet you first, whatever it is. But there's an opportunity to practice this. Let's be two monkeys in the cage, and a place where we can be our full selves. Because a lot of what happens at work, we have to be this kind of stripped down version of ourselves and do the work. And no stripped down version of Faith can do the work that you're asking Faith to do.
That's correct, which is why dangerous spaces in work is so antithetical to the productivity we're trying to obtain. This one's hard for me because I see so clearly that if we just fixed some of these things, we would be getting the productivity we're complaining about not having.
Right. And yet, because we don't know, like this idea of dangerous space, it's just dangerous to the person it's dangerous for.
Right.
It's not dangerous for the other person,
Right.
right?
No.
It's just like this is just normal, right? So there's the vulnerability of holding this, like letting yourself be so vulnerable, and being in a space with another person that has to let themselves be vulnerable to be the person who's perpetuating the problem. Like it's the mutual vulnerability that's needed to make this happen. It's gonna feel massively uncomfortable. I've told you the story about when my kids told me about cutting down the tree in the yard. Have I
No. I don't think
like
we've talked
I
about.
discussing none of the tree. So like my daughter came and said, what happened to the tree? The gardener had come and said, this tree's dead, so close to the house, the roof and all the things. I saw the money. And I was like, absolutely, cut this tree down. And when the tree was gone, my daughter said, how come you cut the tree down? And I was explaining what happened. And she said, but you didn't discuss it with us first. You're hardly in the yard. You're not, you don't experience the yard. So how come you're making that decision to just cut the tree down? So we're in this moment where she's actually willing to be her vulnerable self and express this thing to me as the person in power. So then me as the person in power, what's the thing I need to do? So I was like, the tree needed to go down as far as I was concerned because of the roof, the roof. But I had to hear this thing. She was like, you didn't give me any voice in the conversation around something that you don't even experience. So then I had to be that person that said, I'm really, really sorry about that. I didn't think about that at all. And it makes perfect sense. I'm so sorry. This is what was going on and this is why I did it. But I hear what you're saying. And the next time I'm going to, whatever. And then, of course, right after. So then we had a whole big meeting around the other tree. and, and I'm like, so there's me being vulnerable enough to say I made a mistake. I get what that could feel like. And not say, how dare you? I am protecting your life. You know what I mean? And getting all defensive. And I think that's a leadership skill that must be in place. Like, I can hear what you're saying outside of the words that you're saying, which is that you didn't have voice in a moment when you needed to have had voice, that I didn't check in with you at all. And so that vulnerability on both sides is critical. Otherwise, this isn't going to work. Um, but I think that if we're able, because there are lots of spaces where we can be with our people and be less vulnerable, and the leadership stays where they are. This is not going to create sustainable change, but it will
Right.
provide us with the monkey in the cage, in a sense, where we are with our people, and that brings our cortisol down, and that nourishes us enough, and that gives us courage so that we don't have to recover from work. Because I think that's really, really important. Even if leadership continues to be ridiculous,
Hmm.
we have to I shouldn't be calling leadership ridiculous, but ridiculous. We have to provide ourselves with our security blanket within the
Hmm.
workspace so that we can so that the cost of work is not as high as it is, because the cost is right now just too high. And businesses are seeing that with the turnover and stuff, but humans are seeing it because many people can't afford to
Right.
leave.
Right.
And so children are seeing it, relationships are seeing it, it's everywhere.
And it's cyclical, right? If I don't have enough courage to feel brave in my job, I'm certainly not going to feel brave enough to look for a different job. I'm
Yeah.
certainly not going to feel brave enough to do things in the rest of my life because I feel so much deep seated anxiety around my work. It's, and truly, it's the place where people get stuck.
The cycle can be weird too, right? Because it can also be you've moved in your boundaries so much at work, right? Because you feel like you have no power, so you keep shifting them, and there's no, they're they're encroaching everywhere. And so you become overbounded at home. You become rigid and hyper controlling with your kids or with your partner or with, whatever the other spaces are. And none of that creates like a society that feels healthy for us. Because that tight control is just, it's brittle to breaking, you know? And so that's yeah, it's like it has to be healed because this process is not sustainable. And I'm a big advocate of just burn the whole thing down. But and I understand that we can't, there are too many people in the ship to burn it down. So we must be in processes of steering this thing away from the rapids that is going
Right.
over.
I mean, and that's what it comes down to. There is so much here that needs to be thrown away entirely and just rebuilt from scratch. I know we both agree education is one of those things,
Yeah.
but most of the corporate structure needs to go too. And yet, how do you redo that without affecting the people who are in the system now?
You can't not affect them, but you can be mindful of how we're affecting them, and be thoughtful about that. It requires a top down and bottom up approach, because if we're not addressing, like we've talked about, what happens in the micro communities and empowering micro communities to be healthy, like if we can't make 4 people healthy, no way 2,000 people, right?
Correct.
It's not gonna work. But we have to kind of have the umbrella idea about these 2,000 people, and then be figuring out what needs to happen in these small pockets, whether that's about changing our leave policies or vacation policies so that people can have community. It's like this is not, or even, I was thinking about it today. We know that relationships at work cut down on things like conflict and silos and makes the workflow better. We know this, but people don't have time to talk to each other. Right? And especially now that we've got into the hybrid work type of situation, although we want people back in the office, it's all weird, and I'm not even going to weigh into that. So people used to do this by water coolers, in restrooms, in elevators, right? We're catching these moments to kind of co-regulate with each other. But now, when are we doing that? Because we'd have to do it outside of work. And so for something that's essential to work to be happening outside of work, you're making that the responsibility of the people to do outside of the job. Whereas I'm
That's
like, put
correct.
it in the workflow. it has to be in the work day.
It should
Like
absolutely be in the
nine
workflow.
nine to 9:30, go walk. I mean, you don't want to call it walk and look at the water cooler and talk to people, but in essence, if relationship, the thing, Briar, I should finish my sentences, but the thing, Briar, is that people at the top of the ladder know this is important. So they put in their workday, play golf with so and so. Right, that's in their workday, but I'm not allowed to have it in my workday. So they acknowledge it that it's important, and part of this means it needs to be in the workday for people to be able to connect with each other, to be able to understand each other, co-regulate with each other, and figure out what does Briar mean when Briar says or doesn't say, when Briar gets up halfway through the meeting. What does that mean? We need time with each other to figure that out. And it shouldn't be go time when we're like, okay, no, we would actually, the event is coming. That's not when we figure that out.
No, because it's too late at that
No,
point in time.
it's too risky now, right? So,
So, okay. If structurally it does not feel safe to build in micro relationships that will reduce your cortisol, what do we do then?
therapy.
I mean,
Yes,
I'm hard pressed to argue with you here. Yeah.
CBD. I think that wherever in your relationship structure there are people with power and privilege, as much as possible, express this to them so that for somebody else. I have a thing about for the sake of who. I agree that this is expensive for me, but I'm always thinking about my kids coming into this space. So I might be leaving or I might not be able to be coping, but I'm like, for somebody's sake, I'm going to advocate for this. So if there is a person that I can just like, hey, listen, this is not sustainable. This is why Mary just left, right? And I'm going to talk about it as much as it feels safe. That's number one. And number two, let's build this community outside then for your own sake. Because of the way the work structure is, many of us don't feel like we have time. But I would be like, let's make the time in some way. Way back in the day, in my history, I'm going work in a corporate, which is just like 30 years ago. Oh my goodness. Me and a friend from two different corporations that were in the same building, we just met up at 12:15 on the stairs, and we two Black women from Jamaica walked together over to the place, bought the food, walked back over, and we nourished each other. And I think we used to do this because it was convenient. Now we have to do it because it's essential. Right. So
Correct.
there is whether it's lunch or whether it's like, okay, is there a stop on the way to work, on the way back from work? Like, what's the way? These building of communities of support outside of work is even more essential if we're not, if the work is not nourishing in many ways. And lots of minority groups, lots of marginalized groups already know this and have affinity groups that they participate in. And I think that idea, even if you can't find an established group, form one of your own. I have a friend who has a group of colleagues from different organizations that she's just been with for 10 years. And every twice a year, they meet up somewhere and they are together. I think that's important for like your professional development and your heart nourishment. And hopefully somebody in the organization will pay attention. And
Right. Like the goal of, or not the goal, but at least one of the objectives of an affinity group should be to bring to the attention of people in power that that's required,
yeah,
that 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 these people together feel a type of way that is not being heard and acknowledged.
that the nourishment that people get from being together is essential. Talking about things that matter to them, that may not have anything directly to do with the specific project that's going on, because people are people. That's, it's like it doesn't have to be specific to the actual project. In fact, the project might go faster
Well,
if
see, and that's what it always
the
comes
sun is
down
having a
to.
minute.
for me. Every time I hear that this is extraneous, I'm like, well, actually, if you just let it happen organically, everything else will move so much faster.
If you actually look at how people have worked together in before we had the quote unquote office type structures, like who is stopping people on a farm in a cane field, except for when there were slaves, stop slave masters stopping the slave. But like when people are working organically in the ways they worked, no one policed the conversation. So I am working and I am dialoguing. When you look at what how women traditionally, the maternal caregivers or whoever it is that's handling the stuff quote unquote at home, that the huddle that's created, children and all kinds of, and everybody is working and dialoguing. And like this becomes completely missing because we're supposed to be only on topic. So like that communion, that kind of sharing, that kind of shared attention around the problems that I face, then we were stripping that completely away and then expecting people. So people even say to me, and this feels always feels uncomfortable when people say this to me, like, but how do I make the meetings productive? Because it could run off down the road of somebody's thing. And I honestly feel, I mean, I try to be practical for that person and their needs, but I honestly feel it runs off because it's not the norm. If people knew that they could express their stuff and it is safe to do so, we wouldn't have people running off, right? It just be normal. It's like when the kid is just eating gorging on candy, but then when you kind of make it okay for people to choose their food, then they just eat the right amounts, hopefully. Things.
I was reading a thread earlier today that was talking about the ways that when rich people do something, it's seen a certain type of way versus when poor and or marginalized groups do something. And truly, networking is one of those things. It's absolutely essential when people in power get together and network. But if the rest of us do it, we're just interfering with productivity.
Yeah, yeah,
How
yeah.
do we make that need clearer to the people in power?
I do think that there's a bunch of education that's needed where that's concerned, but not education like workshops as much as like a real tuning in to what humans need. And so I challenge HR and I challenge whoever is doing training, learning and development and all this stuff. Like, what are the actual things? Like, if we're training people on Excel, if we're training leaders on, I don't know, what are the different leadership approaches? A lot of this now is like, what do humans actually need? Because we have it wrong and we need to acknowledge that we have it wrong. We've basically been saying to humans, don't be human for a really, really long time.
For a long
And
time.
so I do think that it's an awareness piece, and then there's an accountability piece to it. Like we're holding, what's the name of that ethics organization? There's a large ethics entity that people submit their stuff to. They rank organizations according to their, how much they're living up to the ethical standards. I think that needs to be in there as well. Like the whole set, the perception of well-being, which is a really complex thing. Are we measuring that? And are we saying across our organization, these four things of well-being, how are we doing with that for our organizations, for our people within our organizations? That it needs to be, people need to be held accountable for that.
People do need to be held accountable. So I think that's the last question. What can we do at an individual level to start holding the system more accountable?
I think that if we are back to the communities, because it takes courage to do some of this work, if within our communities we feel we have the courage to take small steps, we could decide together on what those small steps are and take them. So, for example, one of the steps that I think is important is um, to not qualify what sick means. Like if you have 10 sick days to take and you are depressed this morning, you are overwhelmed today, you are like this whole, it's, oh, if you have COVID, you can take time, but if you have sensory overwhelm, you can't take time. Then nobody needs to know what sick is, and I think that, but we have to know that we can take that time for ourselves, whatever those things are. Similarly for our children, or for whatever else is going on. So I think there are steps like that, how do we make space, like when people invite us into work that's not ours, how do we have those conversations and say, I'm no, I that's not, or is there more time, or moving the deadlines? There's a way that we've been compliant around some of the things that are infractions and encroachment, and I think pushing back on it, and then when there's space to do so, explaining, giving the time. Like I had a couple of conversations with some leaders about about the living wage. And it's like, it's not just like for a person with multiple children from a marginalized identity. This is how it's experienced is different. And so then being just, here's a link to MIT's thing. I'm not saying anything about what you're paying me, although I am, but I do think you want to think about this, because we have this situation that's happening, revolving door and so on, And so just like, what's the data that's already out there, and how can we share that as is relevant? I remember when the anti-work Reddit was very, very strong. I was just sharing. I was like, here, take a look at this. There might be some ideas here when we're thinking about hiring in the future. And there are ideas also about the current workforce, but let's even, so when we see problems in our workspaces, we can say, here, take a look at this. Here, take a look at that. And so,
Yeah, I think it's cultivating curiosity. And that is the most that we can do on an institutional level. If you are not the leader of the institution, then the best that you can ask for is that people will be curious when you offer information.
yeah. And being okay with the fact that, because we worry about, will they be curious or will they be upset? And we can't
Hmm.
control whether they're upset or not. That their discomfort, there's no way in this work to prevent people from being uncomfortable. So it's like, we hope they'll be curious, but we're okay with their discomfort. Again, as long as we're not in jeopardy. And like, because, powerful people, discomfort, they can, it can
Right.
cause us to not be safe. But it's okay for them to feel discomfort, and hope that that also has them doing some inquiry.
I think the farther along I come through this work, the more I realize that it is about creating discomfort and that more people need to be okay with it.
Yeah.
It's not always going to be comfortable. This
No.
work is not comfortable. But the more that I sit with those points of discomfort for me, the more I'm like, oh, well, maybe that's the thing I need to think about.
Yeah.
Maybe.
There's a nudge there in the
Mhm.
discomfort. And if we can just interrogate it, like, I mean, first of all, get yourself back to the place of being regulated. And then, like, what was that about? What was going on there for me? What was I thinking that person meant? What was I like? And just get into your stuff underneath. If more of us could do that, oh, I think they think I'm a bad person, or whatever it is, then you could heal that and then go back into the situations. So,
Okay, so obviously, we want leaders and organizations to do more of this work with you. Where do they find you to do that, Faith?
they find me at faithclarke.com. I think that the faith@clarke.com or faith@faithclarke.com by email. And for the show notes, at some point, I'm going to give you the website for the landing page for the culture assessment. It talks about some of this stuff. Um,
Fabulous.
Fundamentally, we want our organizations to have the empower people with capacity to co-create culture. Like it can't, it's not done for me without me. That's not going to work. It can't be that you think ahead about what the ideal anti-capitalist or the ideal restorative. It has to be that I work with you, I meaning the person in the organization, like all the people on the ground, right?
Hmm.
But if we can empower people with capacity to co-create culture, then the thing we co-create will be reflective of the actual humans on the ground. And then that's just the place to start.
And really, y'all, that's the work. It's about creating the communities in which you yourself are sustained.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I know. I'm building a whole media network from scratch over here because I didn't like the way that media prioritized people who didn't necessarily have access. So now we build this whole organization where people get to come in and they get to say what they need to say, and then we give them assets and everybody wins. But what I know is that I built this community this way because nothing else I saw was working. And that's what it takes. We have to truly be able to implement or start over if the institutions aren't working the way that we want them to be working.
Yeah, I think even within larger entities, this model that you just described is what's needed. Like
Hmm.
you probably have a nonprofit or a corporate entity or a small business, but you have a new product coming out. And if you have that new product, you could test a whole new way of doing business. Like
Hmm.
let the things that are bringing in your money bring in your money and leave those things stable until you figure some stuff out. But if you have to hire two new people and figure out a new whole thing and a different financial whatever for one product that you don't even know is successful yet, it's a great place to test. Be
Right,
figuring out some new ways of being and then expanding that into your business as you understand it more. You can do that.
right. Because at the end of the day, it's not about what you're doing. It's about what you're being together, individually, as a company. It's about what you're being. And we're going to leave it right there.
That's
So,
right.
what are we doing next time, Faith?
I don't know. I have to go check.
Oh, well, we're going to have to check our notes and it'll be a
I think
surprise.
I think we're going to talk about what does it look like when we've done this well. I think we should go into the
Ooh.
future. What does it look like when we've done this well on our teams and in our
Hmm.
organizations?
Okay.
All
I'm
right.
very excited what it looks like. So few people really truly are doing it well.
Yeah.
So we can give you some sterling examples and talk about how it can look, and yeah, that'll be amazing. All right, y'all.
Fun.
Thank you so much for being here, Faith. As always, you are wonderful. We will be back here next time to talk about what organizations can look like. And if you want to see how you fit into my ecosystem, I would love to have you join us for a masterclass. You can find out more information about that at briarharvey.com/partners. And you can subscribe to the network at neurodiversitymedianetwork.com. Thanks, y'all.